you will. If you go that route, the problem is then you're still not solving the issue of same-sex couples getting the same rights by marriage as heterosexual couples do, whether it is right to property, right to inheritance, right to alimony. All of these are not settled if you merely look at it from the point of view of the Special Marriage Act.
Yeah, it actually feels like abject tokenism, where it's almost like a little bone that will get thrown. But you know, the thing is, as a citizen of India, as a proud citizen of India, as a tax-paying citizen of India, I think we're all at a point now where we're now demanding these equal rights, right? And it's very important. You know, when I was hearing that argument, the fact that they talked about the fact that this was just an urban elite phenomena, I think my eyes rolled so hard, because LGBTQ, the T, the transgenders, that community talks so openly and vocally about the fact that they don't get jobs, that they have to become sex workers, or that they have to become beggars. So, you know, when I was hearing about this whole urban elite phenomena, it just feels like a construct where they very conveniently want to look at one side making the argument. Sure, there could be extremely poor people who are gay, but they're probably not coming to the forefront because they don't have livelihoods, they don't have money at the moment. At the same time, the other counter argument is, even if it is an urban elite phenomena, which it is not, so what? Because equality and rights have never depended on your social and monetary status. Because by the same logic, if these were poor people, would you then have said, oh, they're only poor, we don't need to listen to them? So either way, that argument held no water for me, because when you're saying basically this is just urban elite or that they're not making money, it makes no sense. The second part, which I thought was very deeply questionable, when they talked about the fact that India is not ready, you know, popularity, the popular vote doesn't often mean the thing is right. Popularity doesn't always mean it's the path of righteousness. Sati was a popular concept, but we had to get done with it. There was a point where everyone thought child labor was just fine. Everyone thought child marriage was just fine. But these amendments and these laws were changed because we had to move with times. Just because today a popular majority thinks that, you know, LGBTQIA is just okay, it's not cool. You know, when you talked about the fact that these laws will also make sure that now, even when I find a boyfriend, first of all, finding a boyfriend and a husband is still going to be a task. But even when I do find that person,
hello, namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight we bring you the latest episode in the Chinese spy saga. They've reached the Antarctic, they're building their 5th base there. Australia and New Zealand feel threatened. China says this base is for research, but the West does not agree. How many countries have bases on Antarctica? India does. We'll tell you about the others too. What do they do? And is Antarctica the next battleground? That's our lead story tonight. In France, the hypocrisy over free speech is being exposed. It involved both France and the UK. A publisher involved in protests against President Macron has been arrested, and that too on anti-terror charges. In America, the hypocrisy over human rights and child rights is being exposed. They're suffering a labor shortage, so they've amended laws to allow children below the age of 16 to work. Is child labor kosher now? And why is an influencer video on Bournvita making waves? What new rules is India introducing to regulate health influencers? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. North Korea all set to launch a spy satellite. Kim Jong-un says the development of the country's first military spy satellite is complete and that it's to counter threats from the US and South Korea. America's abortion debate reaches the Supreme Court again. A lower court had restricted the use of a pill called mifepristone. The Biden administration filed an emergency plea. Now the top court will decide. Mifepristone is used in more than half the abortions in America. It's official. India is the world's most populous nation. The latest UN data shows India has overtaken China with a population crossing 1.4 billion. China has been regarded as the world's most populous country since the fall of the Roman Empire. The skeleton of a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex has been sold for over $6 million at a Swiss auction. But the amount is below expectations for the 67-million-year-old creature. This is the first time a T-Rex has been auctioned in Europe. And it's the end of an era. Netflix will stop mailing DVDs of movies and shows to its subscribers after 25 years. The move completes Netflix's full switchover to streaming. The great power rivalry has a new front. The cold, icy terrain of the Antarctic. China is making moves even in the Antarctic. And what is China doing there? Building a base to snoop on its rivals. So first the balloons, then the secret police stations, and now surveillance bases in the Antarctic. Clearly, China is very serious about spying and control. It is building its 5th station in the Antarctic. It already has 4 stations. Now a 5th one is coming up. Let me show you some satellite images. This is where the new Chinese station is coming up. This is the Inexpressible Island. It's the name of an island in Antarctica, Inexpressible. It's a small rocky island near the Ross Sea. On first impressions, this looks like a major facility. Some reports have also emerged. They reveal China's construction plans. They say the new station will have an observatory with a satellite ground station, sites for energy generation, areas for research, a helipad, and a logistics hub. What will China do with such a large facility? The West has its suspicions. It believes China will use it to snoop on the region. The equipment on the site might serve a dual purpose: scientific research and spying. And how does that work? Reports say this base could potentially intercept satellites of other nations. Which other nations? Let's pull out the map to understand. This is the site of China's next station on the Antarctic. Now let's zoom out. What do you see on the north? Australia and New Zealand. If China starts snooping from the new site, Australia and New Zealand will be the obvious targets. The Chinese base is well positioned. From here, China can intercept signals and gather intel on Australia and New Zealand. It can track the rockets launched from Australia. And here's something you should know. China's presence and interest in the Antarctic is not new. But the threat perception is. China has been working in the region since the 1980s. It has built 4 bases here over the years. 4 bases. This is going to be the 5th one. Beijing calls them scientific research centers. But the US has its doubts. In 2022, the US Defense Department published a report. It was about the Chinese military, but it also had a section on China's presence in Antarctica. Listen to what it said. China's strategy for Antarctica includes the use of dual-use technologies, facilities, and scientific research, which are likely intended, at least in part, to improve the PLA's capabilities. The PLA, of course, is the Chinese Army, the People's Liberation Army. That's the Chinese strategy according to the US. Is this even legal? The answer is no. There are clear rules of operation in this region. We are talking about the Antarctic Treaty of 1959. It spells out 3 rules. All activities on the Antarctic must be peaceful. Military personnel are allowed on the continent, but only to participate in scientific research. They cannot engage in military activities like setting up bases, carrying out maneuvers, or testing weapons. All of this is not allowed. And China is party to this treaty from 1959. But then again, China is not famous for following rules. Now, for most of us, the Antarctic is a massive patch of land covered in ice, a place where no one can live. But the fact is, the Antarctic is a crowded place. At least 30 countries have stations in the region. 30 countries, including India. India, too, has a base there. Do you know how many bases there are in all? At least 82. According to one estimate, there are 82 bases, so the Antarctic is getting crowded. The question is why? Why are so many countries interested in this cold and remote region? 2 reasons: strategic and economic. Antarctica sits at a crucial point on the map. It falls in the middle of 3 key oceans: the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean. And this makes the Antarctic a critical point for satellite communications, for surveillance, and also for navigation, which is why so many countries want a piece of the Antarctic. The second reason, like I said, is economic. And on this front too, the Antarctic could have a huge potential. None of this has been proven yet, but several experts say this region has billions of barrels of oil. It has rich reserves of natural gas, even precious minerals like gold and platinum. As of now, drilling is not allowed in this region. The Antarctic Treaty prohibits it. But these rules could change in the year 2048. That's when the treaty comes up for review. And that's what countries like China are waiting for. When this treaty expires, anything could happen. Countries could even push for Antarctica to be divided. So science is just a proxy for geopolitics here. The real game is about dictating the future of the Antarctic. The race is already on. China's expansion is aimed at the future. It would want to control large parts of this region. The West will push back and a new battleground will emerge. Liberty, equality and fraternity. As the French keep telling us, these ideals grew out of their revolution, the French Revolution. President Macron is no different. He has appointed himself as the defender of free speech and free press. Unless, of course, his government is the target. Then everything is fair game. This story is about how France and its frenemy Britain persecuted a journalist, a French publisher who opposed Macron's pension plan. It's got illegal surveillance, terror charges, and police overreach. Everything that would guarantee criticism from foreign offices in Paris and London, except this time, they are the culprits. The publisher in question is a man called Ernest Mouret. He works at a French publication called Éditions La Fabrique. It's left-leaning and anti-Macron. On Monday, this publisher was traveling from Paris to London. He was planning to attend the London Book Fair. When he reached the train station, Scotland Yard officers were waiting for him. They pulled him aside. They questioned him without a lawyer and eventually arrested him. The charges? Terrorism. Remember, this is happening to a French publisher in London. According to Britain's Terrorism Act, all of this is legal. The interception at the station, the questioning without a lawyer, the arrest without justification, all of this is permitted under certain sections of the Terrorism Act. But the question is, what prompted this heavy-handedness? The police say the publisher was involved in France's pension protests. Nothing illegal last we checked. How does that justify invoking a terror charge? And more importantly, how did Scotland Yard know that this publisher was traveling to London? The speculation is it's a joint operation, that France tipped off Scotland Yard. And if so, it's a violation of monumental proportions. The police asked this man to give up his phone and passcodes. When he refused to do it, he was taken into custody. It was only on Tuesday that the French publisher was released on bail. So much for freedom of press. The fact is, we should not be surprised by any of this. President Macron's free speech monologues are a facade at best and hypocrisy at worst. Consider a few of these examples. In July 2021, a French billboard owner was fined 10,000 euros. His crime? Depicting Macron as Adolf Hitler. Now, I agree the comparison was in poor taste, but remember, this is the same president who defended insults to Prophet Muhammad as freedom of expression. Surely the billboard was not as bad. In 2019, a French court convicted 2 people on contempt charges. Guess what they had done? They'd burnt effigies of President Macron. It happens nearly every day in India. The third sample is from last month. A 50-year-old woman was arrested from her house by 3 officers. Guess what she had done? Posted a Facebook message calling Macron garbage. And this sums up his attitude to free speech. It's a fundamental right as long as Macron himself is not affected. But if you criticize his policies, you get arrested in London. If you burn his effigies, the court convicts you. And if you compare him to Hitler, you cough up 10,000 euros. Hypocrisy at its finest. In this latest case, French authors and publishers are rallying against the government. They've asked Scotland Yard to drop the case. They've also asked the French government to guarantee the publisher's safety. If only he had been arrested in Asia or Africa. Then Macron would have probably flown down to secure his release. But right now, there is silence from Paris. In America, a new trend is catching on. People are buying groceries on EMIs. And no, this is not some finance trend. Many households are in distress. Inflation is squeezing their monthly budget, so people are buying food by taking out a loan. They're using instant credit apps, buy now, pay later schemes, also called as BNPL, buy now, pay later. You must have heard about this. It's the hottest trend in finance. You buy something today on a loan. You get what you need on the same day, but you don't have to make the payment. You can split your bill in easy installments and pay the loan over a period of time. Now, buy now, pay later is not a new idea really. People use it all the time to get their favorite gadgets, to buy appliances, or for a big ticket purchase like a car. But buying food on EMI is a sign of financial pain. It usually means you don't have enough money in your pocket today. You're going into debt just to put food on your plate. American households have been going through this pain for some time. Let's look at the numbers. How many Americans use buy now, pay later apps? About 50% according to a survey. Out of these, 1 in 5 use apps to get groceries. 27% Americans use these loans as a bridge just to get through the month before the next paycheck lands in their accounts. They take out a loan. Now let's look at the breakup of these loans to understand how BNPL, buy now, pay later money is spent. In the first 2 months of 2023, 40% of BNPL loans were issued on groceries, 40%, 38% on home furnishings, 8% on apparel. So groceries had the highest share, 40%. And clearly there's a problem here. How did Americans end up with no money? It began during the pandemic. Many households needed financial support, so they turned to these apps because they're very easy to use. Getting loan is as easy as installing an app and signing up. In 2019, buy now, pay later loans amounted to just $2 billion. In 2021, this number had shot up to $24 billion, and that's a jump of more than 1,000%. So BNPL loans became popular during the pandemic. What happened next made them a necessity for American households. Inflation skyrocketed in the US. Last year in July, America reported its highest inflation in 4 decades, and this has a direct impact on prices of household goods. In December, grocery prices were up by almost 12%. Prices of eggs shot up by 138%. Butter sticks, 38.5%. All-purpose flour, 34.5%. Spaghetti and macaroni, 31.3%. That's the kind of price rise Americans had to deal with. Monthly expenses of many families doubled. They simply struggled to make ends meet. So they had to resort to these instant loans, buy now, pay later schemes, and credit cards. Now, inflation has begun to cool, but it's leaving many households in debt, and some are struggling to keep up with their payments. Again, I have some numbers. At the end of 2022, Americans had $986 billion worth of credit card debt. $986 billion. In the last 3 months of 2022, credit card debt had surged by $61 billion. It's the largest quarterly jump in history. So we have loans for basic needs and high levels of debt. And these are classic signs of financial distress. Just ask yourself this question. Would you buy a sandwich on a loan? If you had the money, perhaps you wouldn't. You would avoid falling into debt over a sandwich. But American households seem trapped in a debt cycle. They're taking loans to make ends meet. And this never ends well. The exodus from Afghanistan continues. The Western forces are long gone, and now the last vestige of international presence could be on its way out. I'm talking about the United Nations. The UN says it could wind up Afghan operations by the month of May. That's next month. The reason? The Taliban. Who else? Earlier this month, the Taliban issued another order for women. Don't work for the UN, they said. It was probably the last remaining job for Afghan women. They've been banned from schools, banned from media, banned from sports. So aid agencies were like a last resort. Now even that is gone. At first, the UN asked its female employees to stay at home. Around 600 of them are on the UN payroll. They also tried negotiating with the Taliban. I guess lessons are never learned. Either way, the final decision is to leave the country. If that does happen, it would be a major blow to ordinary Afghans. Almost 2/3 of the population requires aid this year. That's around 28 million people. Without the United Nations, distributing that aid would be impossible. And then again, perhaps that's what the Taliban want. Direct access to international aid. The truth is, the world does not know what to do with Afghanistan. There is no consensus on sanctions. There is no consensus on aid, not even on basic engagement policies. Let me explain what I'm talking about. This news came out on Tuesday. Take a look at the headline. top UN official proposes meeting to discuss recognition of Taliban. That top official is the UN's Deputy Secretary General. He wants to convene a meeting of foreign envoys to get them in the same room and get them talking, and eventually to put the Taliban on the path to recognition. And this is the confusion I was talking about. On the one hand, you talk about leaving Afghanistan. On the other, you propose recognizing the Taliban. In all this confusion, Afghan people are suffering. I have some numbers for you. Since the Taliban's takeover, Afghanistan's GDP has fallen 35%. Food prices are up 30%. Unemployment is at 40%, 40. The United Nations says Afghanistan is the worst humanitarian crisis in 2023. Not Syria, not Yemen, it's Afghanistan. The country will need $4.6 billion in aid this year. Without the United Nations, who will distribute that aid? Well, I know who shouldn't. The Taliban. Like all conflicts, Afghanistan too has been put on the back burner. There is no interest in Washington or London or Brussels to resolve it. Take the G7 Leaders Summit in December last year. Ukraine and Russia were mentioned more than 20 times each in their joint statement. Guess what wasn't? Afghanistan. On Tuesday, there was a G7 foreign ministers meeting. Again, a long essay on Russia's war. But Afghanistan was pushed down to issue number 6. Some condemnations, some virtue signaling, and job done. The fact is, Afghanistan has become dispensable for the West. Their new project is Ukraine. It's the harsh and heartbreaking reality for 40 million Afghans. But countries like India have a role to play here. New Delhi must ensure that Afghanistan does not become a forgotten crisis. That's what happened in the 1990s. Once the Soviets left, the world lost interest in Afghanistan. And guess who benefited from that? Pakistan and the Taliban. They turned Afghanistan into a terror haven, which hurt not just the West, but also India. It hurt India's security. So it's important to keep the spotlight on Afghanistan. If not, history has a way of repeating itself. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, there's been a lot of action. Russia has fired drones, Ukraine has fired back. Both Zelensky and Putin made visits to the front lines. Germany has delivered Patriot missile defense systems to Kiev. It's also trying to get Switzerland to forsake its much-wanted neutrality. And South Korea has become the latest Western ally to consider arming Ukraine. I know that's a lot to process, so we'll break it down, starting with the drone war. In the early hours of the day, an attack began. The target was the Ukrainian port city of Odessa. Russia pounded it with drones. Reports say they used the Iranian-made Shahed 136 drones. Ukraine claims to have shot down most of the drones. No casualties were reported. And this is a relatively common affair. Russia using drones against Ukraine. It happens all the time. Here's what is not. Ukraine carrying out drone attacks in Russia. Reports say that happened yesterday. And Ukraine used an American Switchblade drone. This is the first time Switchblades are being used in Russian territory. Now, what are Switchblades? They're a type of kamikaze or suicide drones developed by the US. They have the same function as the Iranian Shahed drone. Find a target and crash into it, exploding on impact. That's what they do. The US has supplied Switchblades to Ukraine. Reports say some 700 of them. They've sent another type of suicide drone too. It's called the Phoenix Ghost Kamikaze drone. America has sent about 1,800 of these drones. So clearly, Ukraine has an American suicide drone arsenal now, and it has started using it to launch attacks on Russian soil. Yesterday's attack took place in Russia's Belgorod region, 500 meters inside its airspace. No damage or casualties were reported, but it marks another escalation in the war. Meanwhile, the leaders of the warring states were both on the front lines. Putin was reportedly in the Russian-occupied regions of Kherson and Luhansk. The Kremlin says he went on Monday. He visited Russian military headquarters in both the regions.
It's important to me to hear your opinion about how the situation develops. Listen to you, exchange information.
The day after Putin's visit, violence erupted in the region. There was artillery fire. At least one person was killed and 9 injured.
First a whistle, then a loud explosion. It was deafening, very strong. I turned around, saw that everything was flying apart. Everyone started to run away. This was only the first flight. Then probably there were 2 more bangs.
During all of this, Zelensky was also visiting the front lines. He was in the eastern city of Avdiivka yesterday, and he too was seen conferring with his troops.
Дуже приємно всіх вас бачити.
It is a pleasure for me to see you. Shake your strong hands and know that you hold the future of Ukraine in your hands. I am proud to have this meeting. I am proud that there are such strong people in Ukraine. Things happen thanks to you. Take care. Our future depends on you. Thanks again.
Ще раз дякую.
Both videos of the leaders were released by their respective governments. They both look like well-staged PR exercises. If this war has taught us anything, it's this. Optics matter. Leaders need to be seen rallying their soldiers. It needs to be captured on video and publicized well, apparently. Another thing we've come to learn from the war is that constantly badgering allies for weapons works. Zelensky has been quite vocal about Ukraine's need for more and more arms, and his Western allies always seem to come through.
It is very important to understand this. Every time we hear that the promised supply of weapons is delayed, every time there are doubts about the type of weapons for Ukraine, about the range or other quality characteristics, it means every time Ukrainian soldiers are giving their lives so that we have this time, the time that is spent to convince, so that the supply of the necessary weapons takes place after all.
Germany says it has delivered a US-made Patriot air defense system to Ukraine. And Germany is not done yet. It is pressuring others to supply arms as well, like the famously neutral country of Switzerland. The Swiss president was in Berlin yesterday and he faced pressure from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz.
We have acknowledged the decisions taken so far and are following the lively debate in Switzerland closely and hope that something happens there. We have adopted the Hague Agreement, that we have installed our laws. And when the situation changes so much, you cannot ask us to break our own laws.
We'll see how long Switzerland sticks to its neutrality. South Korea seems to have folded. President Yoon Suk-yeol has signaled a shift in stance. South Korea will give Ukraine more than humanitarian and economic aid. Will it supply weapons? President Yoon said it could happen, but only if Ukraine comes under a large-scale civilian attack. What does that even mean? What counts as large-scale? Because civilians have been dying since the war began. It sounds like a convenient way for South Korea to choose when to give weapons. And with this, the Ukraine war shows no signs of concluding. Our next story is about child labor. Which country or what kind of society comes to mind? A sweatshop in South Asia or a mine in Africa? Well, we're not talking about these tonight. We're talking about child labor in America, the United States of America. They're making child labor legal. They're passing laws to allow children to do all kinds of jobs, even serve alcohol on night shifts. They're passing bills to enable this. Why? Because the US has a shortage of labor and children can be used as cheap labor. What about child rights? Well, it's America. They can justify anything. And they have a justification for this one too. The lawmakers say children need work experience. Can you beat that? It's as absurd and exploitative as it sounds. State after state in the US is trying to pass laws that will crush child rights. Let me explain with what happened in Iowa. The state Senate has passed a bill. It's inconspicuously called Senate File 542. It allows 14 and 15-year-olds to work 6-hour night shifts until 9 p.m. during the school year and 11 p.m. during vacations. 16 and 17-year-olds will be able to work as long as adults. And what will they be doing? Not just the usual jobs of waiting tables and babysitting. Anyone above 15 will be able to work in assembly lines. You heard that right. They'll assemble goods or pack meat. And we aren't joking about the meat. Kids will now be able to work in jobs previously banned for minors, even dangerous jobs. As long as they're part of an approved training program, they can do these jobs. So expect to see internship offers from mines and meat packing plants for children. And what happens if the child gets injured? Initially, employers were going to get complete immunity, but then there was a heated debate in the Senate. So now children will be able to seek compensation. This was one of the compromises made to bring back child labor in the state of Iowa. Of course, injury is not the only danger that children will be exposed to. 16-year-olds will now be able to serve alcohol at restaurants. Yes, by all means, let teenagers handle booze on late-night shifts. What could possibly go wrong? The bill is not law yet. For that, it must be passed by the House of Representatives. But reports say it has enough supporters, including the state's Restaurant Association, an industry association, also a grocery chain called Hy-Vee. Incidentally, this chain has been fined over $700,000 since the year 2000. What for? For over 30 labor law violations, including child labor violations. Of course, they support this law. And these are examples from just one American state. It's pretty much the same across the board. Child labor has been increasing dramatically since the pandemic. Just last year, violations increased by 37%. And what solution did American lawmakers come up with? Make it easier for companies to exploit children, to hire them, to make them work. Last month, the state of Arkansas passed a law. Companies there no longer legally are obligated to verify the age of teenage staff. Now, legally, children under 14 are not allowed to work. But now there's a new law. So they can employ preteens, and then they can say they did not know the age. In New Jersey, 16-year-olds can now work for 50 hours a week without parental or school consent. This is up from the previous 40 hours. At least 11 states in the US are trying to weaken child labor protections, many because of a labor shortage. They say they need more workers. And so they enlist children and claim that the move benefits children. It helps them learn the value of money, they say. Of course, there's also a catch. The money won't always be fair. Let's look at the state of Nebraska. The minimum wage there is $10.50 per hour. It will raise to $15 per hour by the year 2026, but not for child workers. A bill introduced in January wants minors to get lower wages, so they'll serve as cheap labor. Now put all of this together. Added working hours, lack of age verification, no restrictions on dangerous jobs, and lower wages. It shows the US is heading down a dark path where corporations will exploit children and reap profits. The land of the free is regressing into the land of free reign by corporations, a land where the rights of children be damned. Meanwhile, the crisis in Sudan is intensifying. Rival generals are battling for control of a nation, and Indians seem to be caught in the crossfire. First, let's get you the latest. A 24-hour ceasefire was called today. The two generals agreed to it. They've been under pressure from the US. The ceasefire was supposed to give the civilians some respite, but there was none. Within minutes, the ceasefire was shattered. Sounds of tank fire and loud shooting filled the air in Khartoum. Imagine living under the shadow of warplanes and being surrounded by gunfire. The capital of Sudan, Khartoum, is now a war zone. At least 270 people have been killed so far. Around 2,600 have been injured. This was the fifth day of clashes, and the fighting continues on several fronts. It's a full-blown crisis, even for India. One Indian has died in the ongoing conflict. Many others are said to be stuck there. We don't have a clear figure. There are conflicting reports. One of them says 31 Indians are stranded. It is believed that nearly 1,500 Indian nationals live in the Sudan. They're based in different cities. One of them recorded and posted a video. His name is Maheen. He's 22 years old. Last evening, he witnessed the ceasefire unraveling.
The 24 hours on ceasefire agreement looks so fake because they started fighting again.
Yes, that was the sound of gunfire. There is chaos on the streets. Civilians are beginning to run out of supplies. They're struggling to access even basic items, things like water and medicines. I have another video. This too was recorded by Maheen, and this was earlier in the week.
Me and my friend trapped in the road because army has started taking over many roads ahead and they are checking all the vehicles. When we tried to cross to our place, They started raising the gun, then we ran away. See, army is there. All the water, all milk, everything is empty here on the refrigerator. Wow. See, everything is colors. Nothing left. Food stock is not available.
The situation is indeed difficult. New Delhi is trying to evacuate Indians, but this has already sparked a political battle. Leaders from the government and the opposition are engaged in a war of words. There was a heated exchange on Twitter. A former Chief Minister of the state of Karnataka tweeted. His name is Siddaramaiah. He belongs to the Congress party. It's an opposition party both in the state and at the centre in India. And some Indians from Karnataka are said to be stuck in the Sudan. Now, Siddaramaiah posted a series of tweets. He took a jibe at the Indian government and implied that New Delhi has failed to act. In response, India's External Affairs Minister shot back. Dr. S. Jaishankar said he was quote-unquote appalled at the comments. He told Siddaramaiah that lives are at stake and he should refrain from indulging in politics. Now, Karnataka is a southern state in India. It is set to go to the polls next month. The state will elect a new chief minister. The contest is between the ruling BJP and the opposition Congress party. So the evacuation of Indian nationals is becoming a political issue. It shouldn't. The idea should be to get Indians to safety. And what is New Delhi doing to ensure this? We are told India has reached out to its key partners, the US, the UK, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. These four countries are called the Quartet. They are the key mediators in the Sudanese conflict, and India's External Affairs Minister has spoken to his counterparts in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Both countries have assured support. India is also working with the United Nations to ensure the safety of Indians. This is a developing story. We'll bring you more soon. I could start our next story with a knock-knock joke, but I won't, as it will probably be met with silence. Because this story is about Japan. The East Asian nation is turning into a ghost town. You already know that its population is shrinking. It fell by 500,000 last year. Deaths are rising while birth rates are sinking. And this has bred a new problem. The island nation is now home to millions of vacant houses. They sit empty and unlit in suburbs and rural areas alike, surrounded by overgrown, unkempt gardens. And there's about 11 million of them. The situation is so bad that the government has stepped in. But now these antique homes have a niche clientele. They have found their place in the luxury market. Here's a report.
Who wouldn't like to live in an antique Japanese home? Especially if it's being sold for a few $1,000s. But here's the catch. It may have a terrible rot. Its roof could collapse at any moment. And it's probably under attack by unruly weeds. We're talking about the island nation's abandoned empty houses. And the Japanese have a name for them. They're known as Akiya, and now they've become the country's newest problem. Because a housing crisis is haunting Japan, turning it into a ghost town much faster. They already have a demographic crisis. Their population fell for the 12th consecutive year. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said if this continues, Japan will disappear. It has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, but also one of the highest life expectancies. And last year, twice as many people died as were born. So now, millions of houses are vacant. Japan has a glut of unclaimed properties. The most recent government data is from 5 years ago. It reported 8 million vacant homes across the country. That's about 14% of their overall housing stock. But experts say this number has drastically increased. Now it stands at 11 million. And in the next decade, over 30% of all houses in Japan could be empty. The population crisis definitely plays a role here. But there are other reasons for this too. There is a valuation problem. Houses in Japan decrease in value over time. Eventually, they're worthless. Only the land retains value. So owners don't want to maintain an aging house. There is little incentive. There is an inheritance problem too. Homes are being abandoned by the heirs of previous owners. And some homeowners die without ever naming an inheritor. Others leave the properties to relatives who refuse to sell simply out of respect for the elders. And while the Akia continue to wither away, they don't suffer in silence. They are potentially hazardous and prone to collapsing. Not to mention, they also mar the scenery. But experts say they're also threatening the emotional health of Japan, as they've sparked numerous family disputes. But now authorities are stepping up. Consultants are helping squabbling families, and the government is also giving these homes a push. They're subsidizing demolitions, collecting neighborhood reports on maintenance, holding awareness programs, and allowing local authorities to raise property taxes on Akia. They're also compiling listings of vacant houses, calling them Akia banks, due to which these abandoned homes have found a new love. They've caught the eye of foreign clients who appreciate Japanese homes like its residents can't. And now these homes have become luxury properties. International buyers are snapping them up. They want to preserve the cultural integrity of Japan's antique homes, and they're buying them for tens of thousands of dollars. Akias are being renovated. Sometimes they become homes to new families. Other times they're Airbnb rentals, because one person's decrepit can be another's cultural uniqueness.
They say everyone's a star on social media, everyone's an influencer. They talk about a whole range of stuff nowadays. Travel destinations, cosmetics, food, almost anything under the sun. It's not ideal, but tolerable. What's not tolerable is the recent trend of health influencers. You may have heard about the recent Bournvita controversy. Bournvita is a household name in India. It is marketed as a health drink for children. It is supposed to turn boring old milk into something exciting, but not according to a health influencer. His name is Revant Himatsinka. He uploaded this video about the harmful effects of Bournvita. 3 claims stood out. 1, Bournvita is high on sugar, which could lead to diabetes. 2, it has cocoa solids and caffeine. And 3, it has a cancer-causing colorant. Now, just to be clear, these claims were not backed by scientific evidence, so naturally Bournvita sued. They accused the influencer of defaming the drink and spreading panic. They also said that Bournvita fits all regulatory standards. The lawsuit spooked the influencer. He deleted the video soon after, but by then more than 12 million people had seen the clip. It had gone viral across platforms. Last we checked, his Twitter account had been hacked and then suspended. Why? Well, that's a mystery for another day. For the moment, let's focus on Bournvita. Who would you say is right? The influencer or Bournvita? Well, I'm afraid neither. If you study the Bournvita packet, it's clear that they have added sugar, 7.5 grams per serving, which is around 1.5 teaspoons. Quick side note, the recommended sugar intake for children is 6 teaspoons. So 1 glass of Bournvita takes up 25% of the permissible sugar. Is that too much? Take a look at your child's diet and you will get the answer. So denial won't help Bournvita here. The fact is, their drink does have added sugar. Now let's come to the health benefits. Bournvita claims that their drink will increase muscle growth and boost immunity. They say it has been proven scientifically. But experts are not convinced. Many doctors claim these studies and trials are not 100% accurate. And frankly, it should not surprise us. MNCs are not exactly famous for honest marketing. Remember when cigarettes were called healthy? Or when New Balance shoes were supposed to burn calories? These are classic examples of false advertising. Bournvita could be doing the same. In most cases, such claims are busted as time goes by. There are more studies, more awareness, and more checks. We saw that with colas too. There is now a universal acceptance that colas are sugar plus water. Now let's turn to the influencer. Clearly, he was trying to raise awareness among parents. There doesn't seem to be any malice. Having said that, should we be discussing children's health on Reels? Surely dedicated agencies would do a better job. The fact is, literally anyone can pretend to be a health influencer. And you can see why that's a problem. Many US colleges have already sounded an alarm. One study found that more than 70% Americans have been exposed to medical misinformation. 82% of that came from social media. Chances are India's numbers will be no different. Recently, the Indian government has tried to correct this. They've asked influencers to display their credentials and qualifications. And that will certainly help. But ultimately, it comes down to you and your sense of judgment. Reels are not a substitute for consulting a doctor. Read the packets yourself. Visit a doctor if you have doubts. That's the only way to get accurate medical information. As for Bournvita's outrage and legal offensive, I'll take it with a pinch of salt or sugar, I guess. Our last story tonight is about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's a collection of marine debris in the North Pacific Ocean. And that's a fancy way to put it. It's basically litter that ended up in the ocean. Think of it as oceanic soup of plastic fragments or a large swirl of garbage. Over 620,000 square miles of it, like a plastic island. For starters, it does not seem like a hospitable place. It is poor in nutrients. It's 1,000 miles away from the nearest streak of land, somewhere between California and Hawaii, where obviously the heat is unrelenting. Yet, it is bursting with life. Dozens of marine species have migrated to this garbage patch, and none of these creatures belong to the open ocean. They're all coastal animals. Yet they're thriving by clinging to plastic. Here's a report.
There is an island of trash floating in the Pacific Ocean. It's called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's the largest accumulation of ocean plastic in the world. It weighs 80,000 tons. It's spread over 1.6 million square kilometers. So it's twice the size of states like Texas. And it's like a garbage vortex, pulling all sorts of trash towards its center and keeping it there. You can fish out toothbrushes, nets, ropes, and even broken bottle shards. So it should be a barren wasteland, right? After all, it has 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic. It's an environmental disaster. But ironically, it's teeming with life. A new study proves this. Animals are migrating to this garbage patch, and these are dozens of marine species. None of these creatures belong here. 80% of them are coastal animals, so they usually reside on nutrient-rich shores. But somehow, they've learned to survive in the open sea. And this plastic patch, it's not just a haven for coastal animals, it's also home for open sea animals, like sea snails and blue button jellyfish. Now, coastal and open sea ecosystems are coexisting. They've created a single ecosystem for themselves. Also, a single food chain, because there's definitely competition for space. For example, coastal animals like sea anemones on this patch are eating sea snails, and coastal animals are also reproducing here. This means they have set up permanent residence, even if it's a plastic-based home. And this is shocking for biologists. Coastal species can travel on ships and floating debris, but they can't be out at sea for long, and they most certainly don't create communities there. That's usually because of a number of reasons, including differences in temperature, salinity, and availability of nutrients. But what seemed difficult earlier is clearly possible. Coastal species can make a go at the ocean, as long as they have something to anchor themselves to, even if it's garbage. But as interesting as this is, it's also scary. Coastal species are finding new places. They're taking hold of them, which means they're becoming invasive, threatening native life in the ocean. And apart from disrupting ecosystems, this is also an ecological hazard, because it's a dirty, stinky beacon of plastic pollution in the ocean. The world already produces about 460 million tons of plastic a year. This could triple by 2060. So ocean pollution needs urgent action. And over the last few decades, many cleanliness drives have been up to the task, setting their eyes on this garbage patch. But after this research, cleaning it won't be easy, because removing the plastic from this patch would mean uprooting animal life. Sounds like marine biologists are stuck between trash and a hard place. Patching up this garbage patch needs cleaning with creativity.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with China, a fire broke out in a hospital in Beijing. People had to climb out of windows to escape. More than 25 people have been killed. Russian long-range bombers flew over waters near Japan. Anti-submarine ships carried out firing drills. Also, Russian cosmonauts performed a spacewalk at the International Space Station. In the US, a 4-story parking structure collapsed in New York City. And finally, what makes April the 19th significant? We're taking you back in history. Today marks the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. What was the Warsaw Ghetto? It was one of the largest ghettos in Nazi-dominated Europe. This is where more than 400,000 Jews were incarcerated. It had tall walls, barbed wire, very limited food, and the only way out was death. But on this day in 1943, some Jews revolted against the Nazis. They had one motto: it is better to die fighting than end up in a concentration camp. The Nazis had the upper hand. Most of the Jewish fighters were murdered. Only a handful managed to escape through sewers. Eventually, there was nothing left of the ghetto, but it became a symbol of Jewish resistance against the Nazis. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Do you see the safety setting? You think should do it a little bit farther away, yes?
Groceries module on the earth-facing side of the station, where they will set up shop.
Oh my god, this is like... and dude, Beekman's... Oh my god. Oh, we're getting pace alerts. This is like quite... Now we have to evacuate.
Zaszczyt powitać prezydentów, pierwsze damy, najwyższe władze Rzeczypospolitej na czele z marszałkami Sejmu.
That history, you need to understand that the most important chapter or aspect in the adoption is for the child. So how can now two people claim that no, the child who is not able to speak in front of you, we are able to, or we are capable enough to
But heterosexual couples do that all the time, who want to adopt are doing that all the time. What sort of argument is that? Anyway, let me ask, one second, let me ask Harish Iyer.
I'll tell you,
One second, sir, one second.
Just give me
10 seconds. Harish Iyer, again I keep coming back to, the right to equality and to treat everyone as equal before law is an established, fundamental tenet of our constitution. Article 14 and 15 give that guarantee to every single Indian citizen. even when you go back and look at the, let's say, the Sabrimala matter, I'm taking a purely religious matter, the reason why the Supreme Court struck down not allowing women of a certain age into that shrine was because it violates the basic rights of a class of citizens because of their gender, right? And the Supreme Court said that that is violative of 14 and 15. Here again, you're violating the basic rights of any individual, rights that you're perfectly willing to give to heterosexual couples, basis the fact that they're sexually oriented in a particular way.
I think Zara, one of the important things to speak about is that a constitution is not doesn't discriminate and doesn't say that some people need to be given preferential treatment while some people, just because they belong to a minority community, should not be given preferential treatment. When it comes to marriage rights, that's how it is at this moment. There is enough evidence, enough and more evidence that LGBTQIA plus people, LGBTQIA plus families thrive as much as heterosexual families thrive, whether it is about families with children, whether it's families, if you go in the West, of course, you'll not get examples over here because here you can't really adopt a gay couple can't adopt a child. But if you go to the West, you'll see that a lot of people who have adopted, and they are as good or as bad as heterosexual couples. So the entire idea, let's not even get to adoption and other things. When we are sticking to marriage, just sticking to marriage, let me tell you that we cannot have preferential treatment given to a particular sexuality, whereas the other sexuality is completely left out. And marriage equality is our right, irrespective of what my genitals or my partner's genitals are. It's our right. And as long as two adults are deciding that they want to live together, they want to have the signing authority when one of the partners is dying. They want to have the right to buy. I think you can still take a bank account together, but
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Breaking news coming in from battleground Karnataka. Ahead of the elections, the Congress has changed its candidate for the Shigao seat against Chief Minister Basavaraj Bommai. Yasir Ahmed Khan Pathan has replaced Mohammad Yusuf Savanur as the candidate. That's the piece of breaking news that's coming in. A shake-up in the Karnataka Congress ahead of the Karnataka elections. Now remember, the seat of Shigao was where Basavaraj Bommai is contesting from, but the Congress first picked Mohammad Yusuf Savanur as its candidate and has now chosen Yasir Ahmed Khan Pathan to replace Mohammad Yusuf Savanur to face off against the Chief Minister of Karnataka in the seat of Shigao. I'm joined by my colleague Pallavi Ghosh, who's getting us this piece of breaking news. Pallavi, so why this change in candidate?
So there is a bit of a problem as far as the Congress list is also concerned. Even though tomorrow is the last day for filing of nomination, there are still 5 names which have to be released. I think the change in candidature also reflects, one, the confusion within the Congress party. Second, trying to put up a brave front, a united face, and also a winnable candidate. That's really been the mantra. But this is something which is plaguing not just the BJP, but the Congress party as well. Too many claimants for the same ticket. They're not able to satisfy. And also there is substantial anger among many within the Congress party, the existing leaders also from the state, as to why are you getting leaders from the BJP when we have been around? You're going to give them tickets at our cost.
Right, so that's the piece of breaking news that's coming in from battleground Karnataka, where what we are learning is that the face-off against Chief Minister Basavaraj Bommai, Congress has changed its candidate. Now, Yasir Ahmed Khan Pathan will take on Mohammad Yusuf Savanur in the seat of Shigao. But let's shift focus now to the debate over same-sex marriage, ladies and gentlemen. The debate continues in the Supreme Court before a 5-judge constitution bench over the legal recognition of same-sex marriage. The hearing will resume tomorrow as petitioners argue that the LGBTQ community seeks a life of dignity via the institution of marriage as a constitutional right. They also argue that marriage is also a means to help assimilate queer individuals into society and eradicate social stigma. On day one, the Chief Justice of India suggested that for now, the matter should be restricted to the Special Marriage Act and not personal laws. Today, the Chief Justice of India also highlighted that there is no absolute concept of a man or woman, saying society has moved beyond traditional gender norms. The centre, however, reiterated its stand that the legal validation of same-sex marriage will damage societal values, saying it is much more than a legal contract between two individuals. The centre has also called the demand for same-sex marriage an urban elitist view, claiming that recognizing it means rewriting an entire branch of law. Now, today, the centre filed a fresh affidavit calling for states to be made a party to the hearing. The move is clearly aimed at boosting the culture argument, as there is political consensus across the country that same-sex marriage hampers traditional values. But here is where the argument of former Attorney General Mukul Rohatgi, who represents the petitioners, gains relevance. Now, Mukul Rohatgi said in court, when the Hindu Code came, Parliament wasn't ready. He also said that Ambedkar quit as law minister when the Hindu Code wasn't accepted. The Hindu Code we know today, this is what Mukul Rohatgi said, came in a truncated manner. He also said the Hindu Widows Remarriage Act came in the 1800s when society was unprepared even in the 1900s. The Supreme Court must push society to acknowledge the LGBTQ community as equals. That is the pitch coming in from Mukul Rohatgi in the top court. He also says we rely on the prestige and moral authority of the court. When the highest court clears the right to marry, that will drive society. That pitch coming in from Mukul Rohatgi in the top court. He also said the Supreme Court must understand its role as the final protector of fundamental rights. That's the piece of breaking news that's coming in, and that is the pitch coming in from Mukul Rohatgi as this debate inside the Supreme Court continues to rage. Arguments will continue tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, but joining me on the broadcast is Sharif Rangnikar, author and director of the Rainbow Literature Festival. Thank you, Sharif, for joining us on CNN News 18 and sharing your perspective on this debate that is raging in the top court. My first question, Sharif, is how do you react to the stand of the central government that the LGBTQ fight for marriage equality is an urban elitist view, meaning that this issue does not affect India as a whole?
Well, I think this is just a very weak and hollow defense from the government. I think they're just out of depth, and they don't seem to know what else to put in front as a stumbling block. The first thing is, I think it was made clear during the hearings today that two of the petitioners, one is Zaina Patnaik, a trans woman. She was on the streets begging at one point in time in her life. She made her life what it is today. And she had started to work with KPMG many years later. She's definitely not an urban elite. Akai Padmashila was the other person is another petitioner who was thrown out of her home at the age of 15. She begged. She found a way out to become an important activist in the mainstream world. She's not urban elite. Let's go into a few more cases of people who may or may not have been, or not petitioners necessarily, but people who want love and have relationships. If we remember a few years ago when Duti Chand came out from small town India, she made it amply clear that she was in love with someone and she wanted to get married. And there is history being recorded, which I'm a little surprised that the government is not reading enough of literature. There's a book by Ruth Vanita. And in that book, she has documented, I think, a case which goes back to 1987 or 88, where two police women, I think their names were Leela Andi and Urmila Srivastav, they got married. There is a case which is in the later years amongst these recorded marriage functions that have taken place, or ceremonies, of two Bodo women. So like that is happening across. So it's pretty misplaced. And it's just trying to sort of fuel a perception amongst the larger public, who perhaps is unaware too, that there's an assumption to sort of build, or a picture to build, that everything that is being argued on queer rights is Western. So there's a complete dismissal of fundamental rights, of dignity, as well as of our own history in the subcontinent. You see, once a government or a state starts dismissing the truth, then they're also dismissing the roles of gods that they worship, right? They essentially also trying to say Mohini didn't exist. They don't want to discuss Lord Krishna's various avatars, Vishnu, Shikhandi, there is Ardhanareshwara. There's so much out there. Is that Western? So, or is there urban elite? So I think they're just out of arguments right now. They're just trying to put all kinds of things in there, perhaps to play to a certain section of society, maybe their electorate.
Right. And Sharif, these fears that that the government has raised in this entire debate, that society is not ready, there will be an adverse impact on the cultural status quo, there will be an adverse impact on children as well. That is one of the arguments made by the other side. Do you see a repeat of the arguments used to deny women the right to vote, to deny women spaces in the workplace?
I think, you see, I mean, I don't want to generalize, everyone who thinks like that. Okay. If we, as Mukul Rohatgi referred to two instances when it came to women, but there is more, right? At one point in time, the argument generally from not just the central government, but from people who think similarly, even religious groups, they talk of sanskar, right? That's the same sort of mindset that was used against when sati was being abolished, when dowry was being banned, when child marriage was being till these bans or till the laws didn't change, till the courts didn't intervene, all of that was part of sanskar. And that was supposed to be dharma. That was supposed to be the way our religion is, or that's the way culture should function, how society should function. So these kind of things have happened from time and again at different points in time. And I think in 1956, when we talk about the Hindu Marriage Act, till 1956, a man could marry as many women as they wished. They could maintain or look after them or not. It was their choice. They didn't have to look after the children also at that time. So, and at that point in time, if you just read into that history, we would know that the same sort of mindsets were averse to these changes. So I'm not surprised at the way certain groups are responding, but I believe that the courts know better. And I believe from even hearing, even more convincing, has been the way the bench has been responding since the last 2 days, and looking at finding a solution, because they recognize the aspect of dignity. They recognize the aspect of self-respect. And as Menaka Guruswamy said today, a point that I think a lot of us talk about so often, that there are a number of civil rights that are within the ambit of these laws on the Marriage Act. It's not the problem of marriage. We can still get married. Tomorrow, if my mother and my partner's mother decides that we should have a marriage ceremony, we can. Nothing stops us from doing so. But we don't have those rights that protect that marriage, that secures that marriage. And that's what Menaka was a point that she was making in the courts today about insurance, about banking. Then there is healthcare. There's just so many things attached, because there are too many laws which seem to come from the idea of who a blood relative is. See, otherwise, but if marriage itself as a structure today didn't have these civil rights, and it revolved around a choice and around love, then we wouldn't be in the courts fighting for this. We'd be fighting for different rights under them, right? We'd be going workplace inclusion. We'd say we should be secure there. We would be addressing so many other things that come within the civil rights space. So I think that's the reason we're fighting, and we're not taking anything away from anyone. And I don't think society is that weak as being projected by the government and other people who think like that. I think society is far more resilient, stronger. They've seen so many changes over the years. I mean, to just suddenly say that society cannot handle this, it will create havoc, and words like that, I think is trying to paint society in a very poor light.
Absolutely, and I agree with you on that point, that society is way more resilient, more resilient at the end of the day. And I completely agree with this point, that beyond the traditional argument, the fact that marriage is a legal contract between two individuals, that is what you're fighting for under the Indian Constitution. The statement of the Chief Justice of India, Sharif, on gender fluidity, do you see that as taking away from the central premise of the same-sex marriage argument? Are we conflating two issues when talking about marriage equality?
No, I think his see, one is, I'm sure the the Chief Justice understands gender and sexuality a lot better than many other people. But I think the point that he was trying to make is not to limit the idea of marriage and limit a man, a male, and a female and a woman purely by genitals. This, I think, the point he was trying to make. And so he was essentially going not just into the aspect of gender fluidity or sexuality, but he was also going, I think, in a certain direction which he perhaps was hinting at, because this comes up so often, that marriage is about procreation, that there is a dharma attached, right? Because we live in a country where over 90% of marriages are arranged, and it's almost an immediate expectation that at a certain time that the wife will give birth. So he's trying to, I think, address this point, which is mentioned also in a different manner in the verdict on 377, that marriage is not necessarily about procreation. So essentially, marriage is also about love, and it is not limited by the gender or sexuality or genitals. Because there's this constant thing that everyone says, oh, but why do you want to get married? Bacche to hone chahiye. And there's an assumption that the whole structure of marriage and runs around the fact that children will be produced. So I think as a queer person, as people who believe in marriage, believe in love marriage, believe in these kind of choices, would know that they would rather, if they were to have children, it would be out of love and not out of dharma and duty. So I think they have to get out of that mindset. And I think he was leading to so many other things, but he wanted to clarify that there is no absolute understanding of what a man is and what a woman is. So he was going into the sexuality bit.
Right.
It's quite brilliant, I thought.
Right. My final question to you, Sharif. Let's say the Supreme Court bench says same-sex marriage is constitutionally valid. There will still be an uphill battle to codify it, which will require willing governments and members of parliament. Are we just midway in a long journey?
See, I think firstly we should understand that marriage is not the end game. We're still living in a world, and we're still living in a world where so many queer people are dying of suicide, being thrown out of their homes. There's a lot to be done in anti-discrimination, so that people can find love, feel safe first, find love themselves, to feel sort of fitting into a world, right? Now, definitely, we've seen with Nalsa, it took so long for state governments. I don't think people should just blame the central government here. State governments took long to act on the transgender related Nalsa judgment from the Supreme Court of 2014. If we look at even 2018, states and centers were told in that verdict, it was part of the verdict, to sensitize society through campaigns, through this, that, and the other, sensitize the police, sensitize healthcare people. There are many things stated. That really hasn't happened. That has happened by a few, state governments here and there, and they go around to town, trying to say that they're doing something for us. They're only doing what the court had told them they must do. So it will take a long time. But I mean, it could even happen faster. Suppose the courts put a timeline to it. Say by X number of this thing, you need to bring these amendments in, and it will happen. And but I think even the order can change the mood. Even the order can give hope that we can now start fighting for other, civil rights, anti-bullying, inheritance, so many other things that are there, access to healthcare. But it gives it's that to expect any government to do something overnight, I think is too much to expect. And it will call for a lot of political will, irrespective of who's at the center.
Absolutely.
So we've got time. We'll have to be patient, but that doesn't stop, I think, for people from fighting and raising their voice on these issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sharif, for sharing your perspective. More power to you and the movement to achieve all these rights mandated under the Constitution. And hopefully the Supreme Court, is on the right side of history when it comes